can go right ahead. You have that right. You have that privilege. Go ahead.
Yes, please. Thank you so much. All right. It is shared. You're seeing it, right? Hello, are you seeing the screen?
We're now seeing it. It seems to have had a delay.
Oh, okay. All right. So I was given the topic, doors to crime and violence. Doors to crime and violence. And I'm going to start by just giving a little insight into the probation department. Okay. Now, the probation department is the government agency which is responsible for the counseling and supervision of persons placed on probation and community service by the law courts. I always like to give a little synopsis because I find that a lot of persons don't know what we do at the probation department. I think people are a lot more aware of child care board and the welfare department and so on, but they're not very informed about the probation department. And that may be a good thing because it may mean that you never had any need to take your kids there or whatever the case is. I myself didn't know much about it until I had to do my internship there when I was doing my degree at university. Now, our primary goal at the department is to reduce delinquency and crime and rehabilitate offenders, to produce high quality reports and assessments to courts, to assist in the sentencing process of court, to act as guardian ad litem to juveniles in court and in matters of adoption, to prepare means inquiry reports for court in cases relating to the maintenance of children. And to just break that down a little further, I think most of it speaks for itself. Yes, we do provide reports to court. So when you go into the court pages in the newspaper and you will see that a pre-sentence report has been ordered, that is done by the officers within the probation department. Sometimes they will say the pre-sentencing report said XYZ. That is carried out by the officers within the department. Now, at the magistrate level, we make recommendations, whether it is to place persons on a bond, whether it is to have a fine, to do community service, to do probation, we may say the person needs to be placed in a structured environment. That's our way of saying lock them up. But you have to culture your language, of course. So we make the recommendations in the conclusion at the magistrate level, but at the supreme level, we don't make recommendations. We give the report is the same, but we do not give recommendations. We would just say what the risk factors are and what would possibly help persons to be less at risk, but we would not say what to do with them. We really don't want any murderers coming out and looking for us and say that we told him the judge to lock them up. Yes. We act as guardian ad litem to juveniles in court. This means that whenever a juvenile is charged before the courts for a criminal offense, the first thing the court clerk should do is make a call to the probation department. And the officer that is assigned to that court, or if not available, another officer should present in court, because a juvenile should never face the court without a probation officer who acts as guardian to that juvenile. And also in matters of adoption. Again, persons don't realize that we do adoptions at probation in conjunction with the child care board. They do the whole process from beginning and they take it to a point. But well, I would say they complete the process in a sense, but before it can be passed or anything within the Supreme Court, the probation officer then has to take that report from the child care board, go through it, go and do the investigations within the home and so on. And then as guardian ad litem to that adoptee and to advise the court, because that's what we are, social advisors to the court, we then say, well, I am in agreement with this adoption. I don't have a problem with this adoption or whatever the case is. And the last thing is we prepare means inquiry reports for court in cases relating to the maintenance of children. So people, male or female, mostly females, will go to court and they will make an application for maintenance if the child is not being supported or whatever. And there are times the man may contest it. He may say, I am not working, or I can't afford XYZ, whatever. And the judge, the magistrate, because that is mostly done at the magistrate level, will say, well, I'm going to have a means inquiry report. So the probation officer now then have to sit with the persons, go through their finances, see what their income is, see what their expenditure is, and compile a report so that the magistrate is better able to say, well, yeah, you got to pay $100 a week for this child or whatever. So they will then make the decision based on the report. Now, in the absence of charges being brought against juveniles in the law courts, parents, schools, and other social service agencies may refer children to the Department for Concerning Behaviors. So a parent, we call them kindred social work. They haven't come through the law courts, but the parents recognize that they're troublesome, so they march them down to the probation department for us to have a good talk with, and sometimes we also add them to our case files, depending on how. All right, I'm going to give you a minute. Mm-hmm. Depending on how we assess that child. The schools also refer them, guidance counselors, year heads, the principals sometimes say, go to the probation department and don't come back until you see an officer. Social service agencies, sometimes the schools may send them to juvenile liaison, and juvenile will send them to probation. Because the interesting thing about juvenile is that even though they're police officers, they cannot charge. But the probation department, probation officers can bring a private charge against someone. So that if Julie brought in her son and I'm talking to him, I spent like 3 months counseling with him, I'm realizing behavior is not improving, I would sit with her and discuss, do you want me to charge him, to have him charged? And she agreed to it. We go off to court. The mother must be the person who says that they want to have the child charged. I'm facilitating the process. We go off to court and we have the person charged under whatever act is, whatever we're looking at, whether it's a case of wandering or a case of threatening language or any of those things. Someone wanted to ask a question?
Yes, I did. I would be happy if you define what is a juvenile.
Well, a juvenile is anyone under the age of 16 years old. The day that you turn 16, you're no longer a juvenile. If you are charged with something before 16 and your 16th birthday comes and catches you or whatever, you continue to be in the juvenile system. But as long as you are 16, the process cannot now start. You are now treated as an adult. 13 at this time is the age of criminal responsibility. So I would say then between the ages of 13 and 6 and the last day before you turn 16. I don't know if you all would have remembered the situation where a boy killed his sister in Eagle Hall. I think that happened last year.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Persons will kind of figure, well, it kind of dropped out the system, but that child had not reached the age of criminal responsibility. So all you can do with that child is sort of counsel that child, but you can't have that child charged. There are some instances when things may be so gruesome that the prosecutor may push to have someone on charge, but usually that is to push to have a juvenile charge as an adult, as opposed to a real child not having reached the age of criminal responsibility being charged, period. All right, community service is also a part of the probation department's mandate. This form of sentence requires that offenders engage in unpaid labor for a specified number of hours. In Barbados, right now, the hours are anywhere between 80 to 240. In the case of a 16-year-old, we do not go past 120 hours. So theirs will be 80 to 120, but in adult, it is 80 to 240. I don't know if you will change that anytime soon, but I can tell you in the States, you can have 1,000 hours, all kinds of stuff. But right now we only do up to 240. Now, this form of sentence requires that offenders engage in unpaid labor for a specified number of hours. The service is a benefit to the community, and it allows offenders to make a worthwhile contribution and repay the society by performing unpaid service. Now, community service, I did community service at probation before I actually did the actual probation work. I was in community service because that's a separate entity to community service, to probation. You don't do the two together. All right. And I really enjoyed community service as well. What happened is that we have a pool of entities, establishments, and so on, who have contracted to work with the probation department for community service. And out of that pool, that's where we send persons when they're given a community service sentence from the court, depending on where they live, depending on because people have different peculiarities. They may say, oh, they have a back problem. So you're not going to send them to NCC to clean the beaches because that may be problematic, but you would have to find somewhere else to send them. So we have a pool of persons that work with us, and we would send to those. So you don't just send to any and everybody. So somebody doesn't just say, I can't just say, oh, I want my house painted. So we're going to use some community service workers or whatever. Because if anything happens to that person on the job, even though they have a criminal matter, then the government will have to speak to that. So you don't just send people anywhere. The St. Lawrence School, composite school, that was just painted by community service workers, and Lodge Road Church was also painted by community service workers. When I was a community service officer, I utilized that to have the church painted. So the church would have provided the material, but community service would have provided the labor. So the community is supposed to benefit from these persons.
Sister Cheryl, we can get some more churches painted then?
You can always call the department, you speak to the persons, they will come and they will assess, and they will do that, yes. Right now, there's some Anglican churches too that use us quite well, like St. John's Parish Church and so on. That's an ongoing thing. We have people who clean up their yards, graveyard and so on. Of course, when that person's hours are completed, they go until we can get someone else. But there are churches that utilize them. I find a lot of people don't really know, but the Anglicans, quite a lot of Anglicans use them for having things done.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes, please. All right. So for the purpose of this presentation, I will define door as an entity which provides access to other behaviors. An entity which provides access to other behaviors. Crime, what is crime? What is violence? Crime, by definition, is the intentional commission of an act usually deemed socially harmful or dangerous and specifically defined, prohibited, and punishable under the criminal law. And violence is behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. The unlawful exercise of physical force or intimidation by the exhibition of such force. So, and many times crime and violence go hand in hand. They do not necessarily go hand in hand, because you have a lot of white collar crime that has nothing to do with violence. And then you have lots of other acts as well that may not have to do with violence, like the child who might take up somebody else's cell phone at school. But quite a bit of the charges you would find go together, like, for instance, assault, rape. All those are usually criminal things that involve violence as well. Now, some factors or doors which lead youth to commit crime or to criminal activity. Media influence, particularly social media. You will be amazed how many young people are influenced by social media to do things that they ought not to. With all the TikToks and this thing and that thing, they have some challenges that really, they're very dangerous, and some of them are quite frankly criminal. So the media is a big influence on our young people. And that's why we as a church have got to learn how to use the media for our good and for the good and the betterment of the kingdom, because the devil is using it widespread. So it is a big influence, and as I said, particularly social media. Those living in at-risk communities. What is an at-risk community? It is those communities that we define in terms of poverty and crime. Inner city, if you're in the States, you talk about inner city communities. Here we talk about urban communities. It is not a judgment, but a fact is a fact. So a lot of these communities that you would find in the St. Michael district and parts of Christchurch, high crime areas, you can call communities. And I don't have to think because the names are out there, the Pine and some of the real town areas and the Deacons. And over time, you would find that some will drop out from, you wouldn't hear as much about them on the news, and you would hear more about others, Bonnets, Britton's Hill, and you don't hear as much about them as you did a few years back. You talk about that one in St. James, Haynesville. You're not hearing a lot about Haynesville right now, but again, so they come and they go. Some have been in there for a long time. Places in Christchurch like Silver Hill. See what happened this morning. Parish Land and Ferry Valley area, Tyne Bottom, that whole area known for criminal activity, as particularly drug-related crimes. So you get to know the areas in Barbados are high risk. And when children are living in high-risk community, it exposes them more than children who live in others. It is not to say by any stretch of the imagination that you don't have poverty and crime in other areas, but you're saying that their percentages are such that it makes them high risk. Being exposed to domestic violence and child abuse. Children who grow up in communities in households where there's a high level of domestic violence and where there's child abuse. Sometimes they grow up and they repeat that pattern. And so it leads to them being involved in all kinds of stuff, a lot of bullying behavior and all of that, because they see it within the home. Insufficient parental supervision, and I talked in their dysfunctional families. They're not the same thing, but you can have in dysfunctional families, you normally have insufficient parental supervision, but you can also have insufficient parental supervision where the family is not necessarily dysfunctional. It may just be that both parents are working, they have high profile jobs, and therefore the supervision of the children is not as great as it really should be. So the children are left to their own devices and they get into all kinds of things that they probably would not have gotten into if the supervision was not as slack as it is. And then of course you have those families that are extremely dysfunctional. Everything in the family, I'm telling you, sometimes I go to do a pre-sentence report and I can see how the persons turn out the way they turn out because every single thing about the family is dysfunctional. Everything. Nobody ain't got no certificates from school. Hardly any of them working. The cussing is going on. They cutting up of the marijuana and making the things is a family activity. Everything about the family is dysfunctional. Everything. But thank God, even within dysfunctional families, you have the one or two instances where you have children coming out who they have determined that they will do better. They will do better. But largely, again, when we're speaking, we are normally speaking in terms of percentages because people always like to sort of say, but I know somebody that didn't whatever. There will always be those, but we're speaking in terms of percentages. Of course, there is the, before I leave that one about the dysfunctional families and parental supervision though, I want to add that in there you have things like the lack of boundaries where the children are concerned. The fact that their value system is not what it should be. So the child is not exposed to good, wholesome values or behavior. They or patterns of behavior rather. They lack affection, so they're going to seek it otherwise, whether it is they on the block, because the truth is that some of the blocks are raising children, and they find a sense of identity on those blocks. And then, of course, there's the improper use of recreational time. And you talk about the use of recreational time, and people figure, that some people downplay that, but that's a huge thing. What do you do in that time when you're not at school or you're not studying or whatever the case is? What are the activities you take part in? Do you go on the internet and meet up people you know nothing about? Do you wander around the community on your bicycles and your parents don't know where you are? So the adequate use of your recreational time is very important in terms of lowering the risk of children becoming involved in criminal activity. Then, of course, there's peer pressure. Now, teens try to define their own identity as they enter those teen years and so on. And their parents' influence is replaced by the influence of their peers. And that's a fact. You would think sometimes you have such close relationships with your children, and then they become teens and you wonder, who are these? I don't recognize these children any longer. But their peers become of utmost importance to them. And we have, as parents, we too have to navigate those teenage years of our children. They're not times to panic, but by then you should have invested so much into this child that regardless to the outside influences and so on, that what you have said would still be there. When the Bible says to train up a child in the way it should go, and when it's old, it will not depart. It is the word that would not depart. It remains in there. So if you have all these years before the child comes to that age of adolescence, that's the time to be really feeding into that child and putting things into that child, because it's going to face a lot of influences. You cannot be there with that child every place. But by then, it should have enough in them to combat some of the influences and so on from their peers and those outside. And let me say this, and from the school system as well, because we seem to think that the school system have not also evolved. But we have a lot of teachers who do not believe in God. We have teachers who teach culture as, almost like the Bible. And when we send our children out there, sometimes they are bombarded. And they're, if they're not involved in certain things, when you're in theater arts and teachers say, well, we're going to do it or whatever, and you have to object, you make the child and made them push back where that is concerned. So even within our schools, and I dare say some churches, there is the evolution of these institutions. So what the time that God has given us with those children before they reach adolescence is a time to prepare them for the world and for those other influences that they will come into contact with. Now we have drugs and alcohol, and I think those speak for themselves, because drugs and alcohol, it affects their judgment, it lowers their inhibitions. So things they will not normally do if they're not under the influence, because they're under the influence of the drug and alcohol, they will find themselves doing things they wouldn't normally do. Things like sexual acts. That's a big one, particularly for girls. They will say, they don't even remember anything that happened. They were caught up in, the drugs and so on influenced them, and it affected their judgment. Traumatic events. Traumatic events, I put under that unaddressed issues, issues like rape and other stressors. A child was raped at 5, 7, 8. It was never adequately dealt with. And it then begins to play out when the child is 16. The child is wandering away from home and getting into all kinds of sexual activity. And you're wondering about this child, but it was never adequately addressed. And while I say that, let me say this on the issue of wandering, because that became a big thing, and lots of people who really are not in any way into social work or exposed to any of that had a lot to say about wandering being on the books. And while I agree that a child should not necessarily be placed in an institution for 3 to 5 years for wandering, I'm also saying there's a reason that wandering was in the books in the first place. Because people would have recognized that something is behind the behavior. And yes, sometimes it is that the child may be being abused. But there are other times, and I am stating what I know, what I have recommended myself. Sometimes you lock that child up, yes, because it's the only way to keep it safe. Because you can finally, that mother can finally have a good night's rest knowing where that child is. Not wandering on the streets for every male to abuse. Or female. These are the days in which we live. So sometimes that child has been doing it. And no one asks for someone to be locked up on a first offense. Anytime that is recommended, you can almost bet that this is a pattern of behavior that has been going on for a very long time. So that when I make the recommendation that the child be placed in an institution, I am placing that based on experience. I know why I say that. And while the minister or whoever else, the folk at JIS may not be able to come out and say everything, we who are in the system already know that that child may have been involved in juvenile liaison scheme, the probation department, the child care board, every social service agency might have had that child dealing with at one point in time. The student support services at the Ministry of Education. Sometimes we come and we have a round table, a representative from probation, child care board, Edna Nichols, guidance counselor from the school, juvenile liaison, the school, the same student support services, all of us around a table discussing one child that is in every single agency. And if at the end of the day, there is nowhere else in Barbados for this child because the family is dysfunctional, the child is where we can find it safe at night. No apologies for that, because we know what we're doing, and we cannot allow people who do not understand what is happening to get on social media and tell the professionals what they should or should not do. Each case is taken on an individual basis. So no recommendation is taken lightly. The magistrate is not crazy. The probation officer is not crazy. JIS is not crazy. And I speak that very passionately and strongly because I know what I'm speaking of.
Cheryl?
Yes, please.
You have a raised hand, Sister Alder.
Go ahead, Sister Alder.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Speaking of safety, are the children placed in like safe houses or where?
You mean, at what point are you speaking about?
You're talking about those who wander. You said you put them where they can be safe. So are they in safe houses?
Okay, this is the process for me. If a child normally, most of the wandering that is charged will be charged by us probation officers. So it comes after a process of counseling and so on and so forth. Or the police pick them off the road. Normally, if the police pick them off the road, they bring them to the probation department. Invariably, there may be someone that we already know in the department. But it would mean that I would have been trying to work with that family. Sometimes I may look for another family member that is able to look after that child. If there is no family member, and let me tell you, sometimes the children are the behavior is so out of control that the family members say, not here. Okay. They can't come here, they're too disrespectful, they're too this, they do that. Then you may look at the child care board as an option. Child care board, I wouldn't go into all the details where that is concerned, but they will tell you they're for the care and protection of a child, children whose parents have died, children who've been abused, whatever. But you're now talking about a child who's involved in criminal activity. So they do not necessarily meet the fit. And sometimes they go into the children's homes and they cause as much disturbance there as they were in their homes. And they get away with more in the child care board. You know why? They're not allowed to lash. They're not allowed to do certain things because nobody is to sue the government. So they have even more leeway. They have even more leeway than they have at home sometimes. So because Barbados don't have a lot of resources and foster care is not a very big thing as yet, even though we're doing a little better, the next place will be GIS. But wandering is indeed coming off the books. But when it comes off the books, it will be interesting because you see, when you take something away, you must be able to replace it. So it's going to be very interesting to see what will happen. Because remember what I said, it was there for a reason. It was there because we recognized that sometimes you had to remove children from the environment that was not helpful at all.
Sister Cheryl, do you want to just say what GIS means? Because, you know, GIS
means... That is so true. It can mean the government information service. But in the context of the juvenile justice system, GIS is the government industrial school. There are two, one for the females that's located at Barrows in St. Lucie, and the one for the males is located in Dodds, St. Philip. Okay, then we have, I was talking about traumatic events. So we go on to mental illnesses and psychological issues. Quite frankly, children sometimes can be suffering from depression, paranoias, complexes, excessive aggression, issues like those, and it is played out then in the way in which they conduct themselves and behave within the home, within the community, within the schools, and within some of our Sunday schools too. That's why I believe the time is going to come at some point where Sunday school teachers have to have training outside of the Word of God. Because you cannot just ask a child not to come back to Sunday school because it's bad behavior. That is why it should be at Sunday school. But how do you deal with it? So I think the time is going to have to come because the children ain't getting no better. So the time is going to have to come when teachers, Sunday school teachers, in addition to knowing the Word of God, be able to handle children in an age-specific way and be able to pick up on certain things too. Be able to pick up when a child is behaving a certain way that there may be something else behind it. Okay, there's the idolization of crime as a lifestyle. Some children just tell you, they just love the whole idea of being a bad boy. Well, this is mostly a boy thing, you know, being a bad boy, you know. Some children just love that. They idolize it. So, if that's the way they want to go, if that's their hero and so on, they will want to emulate and they would want to be just like that individual or those individuals. They have low academic and vocational attainment. When persons are not skilled, they're not doing well at school, either in terms of their academics or they're not exposed to any vocational training. They fall into all types of stuff because it makes it difficult for them to be able to get a job. But even before then, because you're still talking about teenagers and so on, sometimes from sheer embarrassment, the teachers will tell you that some of the most bad behaved children at school are the ones that they would term don't learn. So if you're sitting in school and everything looks like gibberish to you, you don't understand anything that is going on, you're going to become a distraction. You're going to become an attention seeker, even if it's just to get the attention from off of you because teacher calling you to the board and you don't know how to think and it's an embarrassment. You would rather them send you out of class, send you to detention because you don't know where to start. It's embarrassing to you. And sometimes some teachers don't recognize that there's more behind the behavior than just a bad behaved student. Sometimes it's a student who is just simply embarrassed by the fact that they cannot get the concepts and they will rather you think that they are bad behaved, toss them out the classroom and tell them don't come back and they go and they wander off or whatever the case is, walk the hallways the whole day or whatever the case is. So that can also lead to a lot of deviant behavior. Then there's a family history of criminal activity. There's some families that they're just criminal families. And if you're involved in the criminal justice system, you know some of the families, and again, some of the names pop up and then they go away and you don't hear much about them for a while and so on. Anybody remember the Clarks from Fix Village? Waggy Clark? A whole family though, criminal activity. And there are more like those names that are known within the criminal justice system. The father, the uncle, the brother, everybody come through at some point. Sometimes people come into the probation. A woman would bring a child in the probation and she said, "You remember me?" "No, I was your probationer generation." She was the thing, the sister was in probation, or to bring the children in probation, and they're bringing them younger and younger. They want to bring them in at 5 and 6. Can you imagine that? That you can't get your child controlled to the extent that you have to bring them to the probation department at the age of 5 and 6. And some of them so waffless that they bring a suitcase with their clothes and tell you, "I ain't carrying them back home." Well, they may coming at me, so we can carry them.
So
Sometimes.
So what happens to those children?
Well, I let the parents know, on certain terms, yes, you're taking them right back home. And I will counsel with them at the end of the day, you're taking this child back home because you have to parent this child that you brought into this world. I will give you guidelines. I will work with the two of you or whatever. But, and that's initially. There have been 1 or 2 occasions where we have had to call the child care board and say, "I got to bring a child, at least for a period of time until we get some stuff straightened out." The child have to go into this care by the state. So there are instances like that.
At 4 and 5?
No, not that young, please. Not that young. I have taken a child to child care board at that age, but it wasn't, they didn't come into the department I was at court, and it was a matter between the mother and the father.
Okay.
And it was absolutely horrible. The mother declared in the presence of the child, "Had you allowed me to have an abortion, we wouldn't have that problem today." The father then made it known that he had the child with him, but he didn't have a home. He was begging, lodging at someone. So he and the child were sleeping in the living room of someone at nights. So we couldn't have that continue indefinitely. So I had to take the child. It was so heartrending. I had then to go to the school and so on and speak to the principal. And then I had to take the child the poor child didn't even know. The child thinking was going on an outing. Take the child to the child care board. And then the child realized, but I ain't going back home. And then the bawling, the father bawling, the child bawling, I bawling too. It was so heartrending.
Did it have a happy end?
Well, you determine if it was a happy end. The father said, just give him 6 months to a year to get himself together, because he had already signed up to get a loan. He was working and so on. The child is still in the system. The father started out really well, but after like 3-4 months, it dwindled, and the child is still in the system. And that was 3-4 years ago. However, I check up in between, and the child care officer tells me, "Oh, he's doing well. There's a couple that has taken an interest in him, and they haven't formally fostered him or asked to adopt him or anything like that, but he spends all of the holidays. Like now for Christmas, he'll be looking forward to going and spending the 3 weeks by them," and so on. So I guess happiness is relative.
Okay.
Yes, please. All right. Then there are antisocial attitudes and beliefs. Some people just got, you ever hear young people talk about the system is against them and so on? It is an antisocial attitude and belief. Everything against them. Nobody don't ever like them. They may gotten a lock. All these different things. That type of attitude and belief leads to people becoming involved in crime, and they never take responsibility. They will they'll be able to tell you all kinds of things about other people and the system. Okay. I hope I'm doing pretty okay for time. Now, how are some of the deviant behaviors manifested within the school environment? Non-compliance to authority. They don't want to hear nothing the teacher got to say. Aggressive, disruptive behavior, and I mentioned that before. They rather behave badly at school and get a reputation for being bad behaved or whatever than to face up to certain truths or for people to find out certain truths about them and their families. They're rather that. Then you have those who associate with the antisocial peers. Birds of a feather flock together, like the old people used to say. It manifests itself in terms of truancy. They didn't come to school, they leave home for school, but they may get to school. Or they have in-house or in-school truancy where they're at school, but they're not at class. They're in the bathroom or they're wherever, but they're not in class. Then you have chronic absenteeism. They're just home. That's different from truancy. Truancy is they leave home for school, but never go. But absenteeism means they just don't go to school. And then they have the school attendance officers at the Ministry of Education hunting them down, all about in the bus stands and thing and going home at them. And I know about that because I did an internship at the Ministry of Education and I had to do some of that as well. Then there's consistent tardiness. They waltz into school at 10 o'clock and 10:15 and 10:30 every morning till the principal gets tired and tell them go back home, go to Edna Nichols, whatever. Sometimes the drug use is in school. Like all have what is the word I'm looking for? Gambling, that's it. They do a lot of gambling. Certain schools experience a lot of gambling. Okay, and those lead to other things as well. And I have there the wandering, yes, bullying, fighting, and other forms of violence. And the bullying sometimes comes out of having seen that same domestic violence within the home, intimate partner violence and so on between their parents, and they go to school and they try to bully others, or they are bullied at home by older siblings, and then they feel, well, it's their turn now to do the bullying. Gambling leading to fighting, you know, people fight and get stabbed and all kind of thing over $1. So all of that is how it is usually played out within the school's environment. Now, it is also seen within and manifested within the homes. And again, some of these you would find some of the same manifestations within the school are also manifested within the homes. Things like non-compliance to the household rules. You tell a child do something, you can't get them to do it at all. And I mean, people drag children into the probation department and tell you they can't get them doing nothing in the house. You're talking about household chores, you know, can't get them doing nothing. And they're so frustrated because it may seem like a small thing, but if you're going through that every day, it becomes very big to you. So there's non-compliance. You tell them come home at a certain time, they ignore you completely. And that's one of the reasons, a big reason to bring them to the probation department too. And then we got to put a curfew on them. 6 o'clock, 6 p.m. you'll be in the house at 6 a.m. And I had a young girl a couple years back who went to District C, and the magistrate put her on a curfew. She thought she was smart. And oh boy, she was a very bright girl. And she was told she had to go to church. I'm laughing because some people may recognize. And she was told she had to go to a particular church because it was a community church. And church was supposed to start, I can't remember now, but I think it was that church was starting at 8 and we gave like an hour and a half. So, we say to 9:30 or whatever. And when we check with the church, when we check with persons in the church, they say, well, she just come in about, if church starts at 8:30, she comes in about 9:15, 9:20, 6, done for 10, 15 minutes and then leaves. And she thought that she had more head than the probation officer or the magistrate. But when I put pen to paper to state how she was behaving and the curfew, which was a 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew, what she would do is that she would keep the curfew. She would get home about a minute to 6 o'clock and she would leave about a minute past 6 the next day, and she would be gone all day and they did not know where she went. So she thought she had a lot of brain. So she was keeping the curfew in terms of the letter of it, but not the spirit of it. So the magistrate was so incensed that she thought she had more brain than him, that he said, well, you're going back home today, not you. And she went to GIS for 3 years. She is out now and she's getting her life together because she was a very, very bright girl, very bright. So you have the non-compliance and so on. They gravitate towards the block culture. Again, in particular, the males, but there's some girls who are gravitating to the block as well. So you will find them, we say they got lions at the gates. They can't stand being in the house. They're always out on the block. And the block is actually sort of raising them. Then the drug use, they get into drug use. For the girls in particular, they get into wandering. The boys wander too, but the girls in particular, and more often than not, the wandering with the girls involve sexual activity. And let me say, like I said earlier, while it is true that sometimes children are running from the home, I want to suggest very strongly, based on my experience, sometimes there is nothing in the house other than that they don't want nobody tell them what to do. So the parent telling them they can't go to the effect that somebody else is going to because they have their own house rules. They can't do this and they can't do that. And the child goes along with their business. Then they're charged with wandering. And everybody who doesn't know anything will say, but maybe there was abuse in the home. That is true for some, but it's not always true. Sometimes they just do not want anyone to tell them what to do. So they wander off and they go about their business, and they have big adults who allow these children to come into their homes and live. So your child will be in a newspaper, can't be found, and they're usually found in somebody's house. I don't know why we don't charge these adults some more. They are found in the homes of other adults, who should know better, because not one of my children friends can come in here at me to the living, and I ain't know the parents, I ain't call a parent, I ain't do nothing. That is irresponsible. And people need to be charged for that kind of thing. So more often than not, there are in some adults' home. Then there's damage to property. They get annoyed and so on, and they break up the things in the house. I had a parent that the child break out everything in the house. And the child is 11 years old, everything. 11 years old. And he break out every window out the house and mash up, just mash. You can smile sometimes but it is so sad. It is really so sad. Then they bully their siblings, and then you have, to an extent, and this again goes, you see this more with girls, depending, it can get as far as self-harming. So you get them cutting up themselves and all of that behavior. And some of it is merely attention seeking and manipulative. But then you have to monitor it, because it is really a real serious cry for help, and they may be experiencing psychological issues and so on, and they may resort to self-harming. It gets them some attention. But I think regardless of whatever the reason is, it must be taken seriously. It must be taken seriously. I just have one more topic to cover, but I'm going to just give a minute for if anybody wants to intervene here.
You have any percentages or anything? Is it getting, because now with children, there's absentees that people might say they don't have any tablets, or so your children could be absent from the online school, and that number could increase by the day.
I don't have the percentages, and that is something that we are compiling now, because our minister has asked us to compile information from our end. But of course, we're not the only people in this system, and others may have other experiences, like Juvenile liaison and so on may have other numbers as well. But from our end, we are now compiling some percentages where that is concerned. But as you are correct when you say that, I don't know what's going to happen in a few years when you really begin to see the effects of this, of what is happening during the pandemic. There are lots and lots of young people who are not turning up to school. The teachers, in some cases, don't mind because they're so disruptive. They're happy that they're not there. The parents can't be bothered, or they're too busy, or whatever. And there are some young people, particularly males, riding on bicycles all about the community, I think during school hours, and nobody is paying it much mind. But when the school attendance officers get that report from the school, they will probably make their checks. But you know, everything is now somewhat affected by COVID. So a lot of your people are not necessarily going into homes like they did, probation and the school attendance officers and so on. Our thing, we go into homes, but we're not going into homes quite as much. We still do it if there's a very serious thing, but we're mostly conducting all our stuff via online and so on. And they can tell us anything, to be honest with you, because parents lie for children as well, especially mothers, sorry to say. They enable them, they lie about them. And about
But she says, yeah, there should be some. There should be some. The other thing is how do we respond as a church? I suppose, I don't know if that you're going to be looking at, or should we have you back to say, how should we respond to some of these issues that are occurring? Because there were sometimes some of them are very under our nose.
It is true. It is true.
Our communities are filled with these incidences.
Okay. All right. So we're going to run through. We're going to try to run through the last segment, and then we're going to discuss a little more, because I'm going to want you all to say to me, make suggestions to me as to how we approach it from a church perspective. All right. So what are some ways of closing the doors? Remember, we define door as any entity that provides access to certain behaviors. So how are we going to close the access to those behaviors? We need to create a child-friendly environment within the homes. Our homes should be such that children see it as a haven of rest. They see it as a shelter. They shouldn't see it as somewhere that they have to run from because it's so abusive and it's so whatever. They're always being told harsh things. They're always being beaten and all of these things. It should be child-friendly. So we have to help our children to channel their energy into positive activities, whether it is through the creative arts, whether it's through athletics, sports, and so on. We have to channel that energy. If we do not provide positive activities for our children, they will fall into negative activities. We have to help our children be solution focused. And that's a big thing in Barbados today. When I see the amount of complaining, I see very few solutions. We are not solution focused. We complain, we murmur, but very little solutions are being talked about. So we have to help our children be solution focused and take responsibility for their decisions and conduct. And let me just say here, one of the things that really get me riled up is when I go to court. I call a juvenile is at court, they're charged with XYZ. I make my quick initial investigations with the school and so on to find out how the behavior is and so on. That when I go to court, I can represent as to what is happening at some level. And the first thing I do is when I get to court is that I'm going to speak to that child in the probation office or somewhere. And I say to that child, did you do this thing? Yes, I do it. So how are you planning to plead in front of the magistrate today? Well, do it. By the time that parent gets that child lawyered up, I call it. In other words, by the time the lawyer comes, they're pleading not guilty. And I get into conflict with lawyers all the time over that. Their argument is the child deserves representation and no issue they have. But my issue is, if you teach a child to say not guilty when they're guilty, that sends a signal to the child's brain that they can do things and never accept responsibility for it. So when the child have admitted guilt to me, and then you come and tell the child, don't plead guilty, let the prosecution prove guilt. The child's brain, it goes through life thinking, unless it can be proven, I don't have to accept responsibility for it. So this, as a social worker, I suppose, and probation officer, there's that little bit of conflict with me and the attorneys when we go to court. They're seeing it from one point of view, I'm seeing it completely different. And I have had a case that was so annoyed in truth, because there were 5 guys out together charged with an offense. And 3 of them was represented by the same lawyer. The other 2 were represented by different lawyers. Those other 2 pleaded guilty up front, did not waste the court's time. They pleaded guilty, were placed on probation ended and everything You know that the 3 that pleaded not guilty, cases are still there, not been adjudicated as yet, because now they have to go through it, which I am sure they will be found guilty because they're there on camera and all kind of thing doing what they had to do. But the parent now is looking for money to pay lawyers why? When the child was guilty, let the child take responsibility. The 2 who took responsibility have completed their period of probation. And you know what was more sickening about it? All 3 of those who pleaded not guilty were given bail and have reoffended, 1 committing murder.
If the minors, they should lock up the parents.
Because you have sent a signal to that child that says, unless I can be proven, I ain't taking no responsibility for it. Of course, they have a right to bail. So they go out and they commit further offenses. And in 1 case, he committed murder. Still pleading not guilty. But the thing about it is that the first offense is on camera, face there and everything. But you let lawyers tell you that so that every time they make appearance, they got to pay a fee. I gone here. I ain't talking about that. So, okay. So we have to teach our children to take responsibility for the decisions and conduct. We have to set clear limits and boundaries, very clear. There are some instances that we cannot negotiate. This is what it is. We have to discuss and enforce the rules of the family. I am all for discussion. I am not for lashing, and I am not here to argue with my Christian brothers and sisters about sparing the rod and spoiling the child. I have taken my position. People take theirs. So I am not here to argue that. And whenever I have to speak to churches, we go down the path of whether or not you should beat the children. I am saying you discuss and you enforce the rules of the family. You come together, you teach children how to think critically. And how to decide, well, this deserves this punishment, and so on. So like I said here, you involve the child in his or her own discipline. This deserves this. And you know this from the beginning, so that when they sort of breach the rule and you say, well, this have to happen, it is something that had been agreed to previously. And they feel respected. Even when they know that they're being punished, they understand, they have a clear understanding as to why the discipline is happening. And they feel respected. Okay, so you encourage your children to voice his or her concerns respectively. I'm not from the school, the old school, very old school, where children could not disagree or whatever, as long as you can do it respectfully. And parents, know your children's friends. Know your children's friends.
Could I say something? Could I say something? Could I say something? I had a 14-year-old son that was giving some trouble. I took him to the probation office.
Yes, please.
The probation officer said to him that I ain't got no right going in his bedroom searching his bag.
That's it?
Hello?
You did? I know that wasn't me.
She said that you don't have any rights to go in his bedroom and search his bag. So I told her the bedroom is mine, the house is mine, and they could go any part of the house. She told me that he deserved his privacy. I said, but I brought him here for you to give me some guidance to help him to try to behave better. And you telling he know that I ain't got no right going in his bedroom. So I said, well, I ain't got no right to sit down here and listen to you no more. They take you up and come along out. But
right.
Then she going back. She going back to England because she didn't come from here.
Yes. And they have that kind of stance. Sometimes people allow their own personal thing to intrude. And like I just said, I do not promote lashing. But I don't get and fight with people and tell them they ain't got no right to hit their child, and particularly not in front of the child. Even if I felt that the child deserved more respect based on what the child said to me, that would have to come when there's a separation, the child is outside or whatever, and I'm speaking to the parent. I may say to them, do you think you could perhaps try something different? Why do you think you could search? Do you not trust the child? Something. But Not in the presence of the child, surely, because that child now feels like, real empowered. So I don't agree with that stance at all. I don't agree with that. Some people bring their own personal feelings into things, and we have to be very careful of that. I don't necessarily, you have to know your children though. And you probably know that you have to search to find, because they're not being truthful, they're not being open. So you may say, even though you understand is a bit disrespectful to the child, you weigh it against what is, least harm or most harmful or whatever. You put it in the balances and you say, you know what, I have to be more concerned with saving this boy than respecting his privacy. So people make conclusions. You form your conclusions sometimes based on the better of the two options before you. Anyone else? Okay, you encourage your child. Okay, I actually finished that. Know your children's friends. So that's the end of what I have here. But I was saying now, as a church, what do you think when you have these children? Because that's the whole thing of evangelism. I know some of us want all angels, but the truth of the matter is God desires for all to be saved. And we're going to have to embrace deviant children within our Sunday schools and within our youth departments. We're going to have to hear that a child spent some time at the road, or even a young person spent a year in prison and come out and in church. We're going to have to embrace people like that, or we should, or not. We are not fulfilling our mandate. So what do you think we can do as youth leaders, as practitioners within the Sunday school, or even generally as people within the church? How do we address certain situations?
Probably going to have to call some names so that we can get. Okay, guys, somebody's responding. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we should do is try to get to know that individual, get to know something about them first of all, before we do anything, and befriend the person. Mm-hmm. I know it may prove difficult at times, but you go step by step. You don't jump on the bandwagon and just go on, but you do it step by step. If you speak to them today, you say, hi, how are you doing? And then they may respond or may not respond. Then the next time you meet them, you have a little more until you get that person comfortable to talk to you.
And I think that is so important, Sister Juvenile. That is so important. And you know what I say, my young people, I have some young people here on. Yes, because they promised me one or two of them promised me.
Yeah, you have some young people. You have Carrie, you have we have Liz, we have Lizzie, we have Danielle. We have young people on here.
Right.
We have the ones, yeah.
Yes, please. But they will tell you, I always say to them, and I say this to I'm Family Bible Time Director. Well, we changed from Sunday school in just the name to Family Bible Time. I say to my teachers as well, it is about relationships. You have to build relationships. There's no getting around it. Before I can correct, I must connect. And that's not to say that if you see a child doing something, you can't correct it. But I am saying the best way to get a child to listen to you is when you have some connection to that child. But a lot of us do not want to connect with the children. We as older people are all about the correcting and not about the connecting. So Sister Juvenile really hit the ball out the park when she said that. And I'm sure she may not have been trained as a social worker, but I am sure her experience, so many years of experience, is such that she got that down pat. It is about relationships. And I didn't find that we in church have these cliques where we like to exclude people and have them on the fringe and them in my whatever. We got to cut it out, though. We got to stop it, like the Prime Minister would say, cut it out. Honestly, there are times that we're going to befriend people and we're going to be hurt. Because people hurt. When children have been going through abuse and so on, they're going to lash out. So sometimes you may be tempted to think, not me, bo. I done with that. I'm done with the young people. I would never reach out again. But that's not the attitude. We have to pray. We have to see what God is saying to us, and we have to build relationships. Nothing can replace relationship building within a church, particularly for people who do not have a culture or history of church, and they're coming in for the first time looking for something different. Don't let them come in and find the same situations from the world inside the church. The cliques and the you know, I can't stand he and I can't stand she, and she ain't got no manners, and she, you know, as an adult, she got to speak to me first, and cut it out, people. We can't continue like that. So as time goes by, we will get persons like this in our churches, and I'm sure that we have had some before. But like I said, I believe that we need to look at other training other than just knowing the word for our practitioners within churches. They must be able to recognize when the little girl who's in church, I would never speak up, is being abused in some way. And I don't have all night. We're going to finish now, and I'm going over to my youth then. But I want to say this. There's going to come a time too when they may come and they may say to you, sister, although I listen to you and you women's chat, they're going to come and they say to you, the body that touched them is somebody in the church in authority.
If that becomes a legal matter, she would have to report it by the challenge.
Yeah, I noticed the document that we sent out. It say that I was very interested in seeing the document with the children and so on. And yes, but do we do it? I mean, it's there, but who forces us to do it really? You know, people will tell you all the time. I was listening to this girl from Jamaica, and this is one of these social influencers. Of course, she's nobody that thing. She just happened across my feed, and all the time she keeps coming. I don't know if it's supposed to pray for or something, because she's an open lesbian. She's married to a woman and so on, and she's always talking. You know what? She was talking about a dance hall artist. No, he wasn't dance hall, but he's another social influencer in Jamaica who had apparently interfered with a young boy and so on. And she was talking about how in church, she used to go to church until she was like 11, 12, and she stopped going. And then she said that this brother in the church, who was like old enough to be a great uncle, had interfered with her during prayer meeting. She went to prayer meeting with her mom, and she went to the bathroom, and he left the prayer meeting, and he followed her, and he interfered with her. She told her mom, and her mom for a while didn't want to do anything about it, but eventually she went to the pastor and so on. But it was so dismissive. It was so dismissive. Nothing ever happened of it. Nothing ever happened of it. And I was listening to her, and I was thinking about it. And then of all the horrors, she dropped the name of a Wesleyan minister and the name of the church in Jamaica she used to go to. She's now living in the States. And I was like, oh my goodness, I know this person. This was not a person who interfered with her. This is the pastor of the church that she said did nothing about it. So she have left the church, and she's leading an openly gay lifestyle. But many times, even in domestic abuse, people will tell you that the hierarchy of the church do nothing because the person have a certain thing, you know, a certain image in church or whatever. So these are things we need to, they're not discussions for tonight, but these are all things that we need to address within the church.
Because if you don't deal with it, it goes long term.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, it goes long term.
Yeah. So I want to suggest, Sister Margaret, that in addition to the word, which of course is our number one priority, that teachers be exposed to a little more training so that they can recognize certain signs and symptoms of other, when you see certain behaviors, that they would give it a little more attention. And also,
go ahead. Sorry, go ahead.
And also how to work with, once identified, how to work with those children. Not just to tell them not come back to you if they're too disruptive, but how to work with them.
I want to suggest further. I think we do a lot of training. We need to get in the field. Okay. When we get in the field and we identify, we give the oil that we can, and when we recognize that we don't have the other bandage, we do like the Samaritan and take the matter to somebody else that can take the child or the situation a little further. But I think we have to do like the Samaritan and apply the medicine that we have initially. But I think that we need to connect with the community. Like you said, we need to be out there and understand why people behave, why they behave, and who's this body's child, because we've lost that connection. We've lost that village connection. We don't know who's a part of our community anymore. And so drug people could come in and take over a community because there are no watchmen, there are no people there guarding it. And so we need to get back into our communities and be visible in our communities. That's my thoughts.
Yes.
In our community, Sister Sandra works with a lot of young people.
Yes, please. Okay.
So we need to do that again. I didn't hear any voices of the younger, like Isabel, do you have any comments? Cara, Samuel, who else? Let me see, is younger. Daniel, any comments?
No, please.
Okay, not even when they said, okay, but there were lots of things for children, there are lots of things for parents as well. Parents, yeah, so it's for both ends. Anybody wants to make any other comment? Any younger people want to make any comment? Okay, I'm hearing none. Okay.
All right. Well, then I just want to thank first Sister Margaret for extending the invitation, and then all of you for joining us here this evening. And I trust, even though you have not really commented, I trust that it is probably a situation where it was very clear and that you found it very interesting and thought-provoking. So thank you so much. I look forward to working. I'm always available. I very seldom say no. I'm not a no person. I have to learn how to say no, actually.
We need to have you back.
Thank you, Sister Judeline. So thanks, everyone.
I just want to ask one thing. I'm curious to know. I know in your training, you've been trained, for this thing. But was there any case that, it kind of like, it was so personal to you, but like if tears will want to come, but because of your training, you had to beat back that feeling?
Yes, of course. Yes, especially as a young officer. When I say a young officer, it wasn't too many years ago, because I went into the field as a mature individual. And I was totally I was not accustomed to it. It was foreign to me. It was, I don't know. Because even though I would have done the social work at university and so on, I did not have an intention of going into the criminal justice system. I always wanted to work with victims. So I thought perhaps the schools or the child care board. And funny enough, my first internship, because when you're doing your probation, when you're doing your social work degree, it is a field that says you cannot get that degree unless you have some work or some practice in the field, which is a very good thing. So the first internship was at the Ministry of Education, Student Support Services. So I got my opportunity to work with the schools as I liked. But then lo and behold, for the second internship, they sent me, because you do two, micro and macro. They sent me to the probation department, and I was blown away. I was like, well, I have absolutely no interest in the criminal justice system. What am I going to do in a probation department? And it is God himself that showed me that if I work with a victim, I work with one person. But if I work with a perpetrator, I may save many people from becoming victims. So I had to change my mindset. I now work with, I have to go and do interviews for Supreme Court. Sometimes I go up to the CCJ and I sit down in front of a person who committed a gruesome murder, or some person, a gruesome rape. And it goes against my very everything inside of me. Because when I'm sitting talking to you as somebody 60 or whatever, and you are talking to me about having raped a 6-year-old, and you may be saying to me, the person was they wanted it, and they were coming on to you at 6 years old. Something in me boils up. But I have to lay aside my personal feelings and see what is behind that. And that's why I say it's an extension of who I am as a Christian and my work within the church, because God asks us to look beyond the faults and see the needs. So I'm called many times not to see the crime or the criminal as such, but to see that person behind and why they do what they do. It doesn't mean that I wouldn't recommend that they be locked up or whatever, or, you know, even if for rehabilitation or what. But the point is, you begin to see every single individual as a human being, and a human being in need of Jesus. But yes, there have been times, I told you, when I took that little boy to childcare board, when he started to cry and the father started to cry, I shed a tear or two myself, and so did the childcare officer. So there are times that you feel that way. There are times you have to make hard decisions. There are times if you've been working 2-3 years with someone and you're not getting through, and then you put pen to paper and you say to the magistrate, that person have to spend 3-5 years or whatever at JIS. And then sometimes the person, they hate you because they feel that you're responsible for them being locked up. But if they're truthful, they know that it was them who pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until you were forced to make that decision.
Has anyone ever threatened you?
In terms of probation, threaten. No, not really. There are other officers who've had that experience, but I have not had it as yet. I've had persons who were really angry, but I've never had anyone threatening me. And I always ask the Lord to help me too in what I say, so that I may be. I said to a guy once, I'm gonna lock you up, but I want you to know it's for your good. When you're up there, you're not going to have these situations that you have at home. You're going to have your meals. You're going to go to school. Hopefully, when you come out, you would have. When I finished talking with him, he'd ready to go up the road. So sometimes you ask God to give you the wisdom to say what you need, how you need to say certain things. I'm not saying that I always do. And let me tell you, sometimes I tear into people as well. But I have never personally had anyone threaten me. I've had people who have gone up and they come back down. I had a guy, and I had a kind of real relationship. I kind of like really liked him. There's some people, some get close to, even though they're naughty. And I knew I had to ask for him to go up. And there was a time that I was laid off in probation. And when I came back, while I was out, some of those clients were on my mind. And when I came back, I learned then that he had gone up. I didn't even learn wild thing. I went to the prison one day to do an interview, and this person was shouting me. And when I said it was him, and he was there on a gun-related charge, I was so devastated. But he said, Miss Cumberbatch, I can't tell nobody I appear because of you. You tried everything, and I want you to know I appreciate what you did for me. He told his mother and his grandmother, and they were in contact with me all the time in the years that he was up there. And you know, he only came out a couple months ago, and the mother called me and told me he was coming out, and he said to her, call Miss Cumberbatch and let her know I am coming out. And that made me feel good. I mean, he's up there and he wanted me to know he was coming out. And when he come out, the first person he called was Miss Cumberbatch. I was not in office. And when I got back, I got a note saying the person had called for me. I didn't call back immediately, but when I came home, I called and I spoke with him. I said, I got to bring you in and talk with you, or come and visit your home and talk with you, because I don't want you to fall back into this same thing. Very bright guy again, going to one of the higher schools, but just got into this thing and went from bad to worse. And, you know, I said to him, just call me if you feel like you want to do something, if you find yourself. So I give him my private number, my private cell number and everything. Call me if you want to just talk, if you feel like you're out there, you're not, because I know that we are a very unforgiving society, and he's going to find difficulties coming back into society and really moving on with his life. He's going to be reminded when he can't find a job, he may be tempted to engage in criminal activity again. So I want him to know that there is someone who will listen.
Okay.
So that you know, so I do have those experiences that make you feel like some, feel like, okay, maybe worth it after all.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We thank you so much. This is a real situation. Helps to let us know that, hey, if we got problems, there are other problems that we need to address in our community. And one thing is our community needs us, our needs our influence, needs our love. And hurt people, and we need to
That's
break
right.
that cycle of so we do need a lot of work, and it's not within our walls, it's outside of our walls. And I'm hoping that we had Mario last week. You might have known Mario from Haynesville, but he's sharing his
Yes,
testimony.
yes.
Yeah, we had him last week to share with us. So the both of them in harmony. But one of the things that came out to me that we need to get out there, and we need to be there where the action is. So if we're going to influence our society, and our society needs to be influenced, they really need us. We are indeed the salt,
Of
and
it and the light.
the children aren't coming to us. And it's all my intent. My thinking is that we need to get to them. We have to go
Man.
to the community.
Just one more little sentence before I go, and that is that we have to be in it for the long haul. I find that too many persons, they want their feel good moment, so they want to get into thing and they want to help persons, but the moment something goes wrong, they're finished with that. If you have that, and that's why it's a calling, because if you have that, it doesn't matter. You're in it for the long haul. Even when you have people who came in on a charge of criminal damage or causing a ruckus or something slight, and they end up committing murder, which means that they escalated, even though they were being supervised with you, being supervised by you. You have to know that you're in it for the long haul. You don't just, you have to find a way to self-talk or find somebody to counsel with you, even as a counselor, because you need that strength to continue the next day. You don't just give up. You don't just say, well, maybe like this boy, the thing, every time next day, you see in the spirit, you're going to commit murder, you're going to kill somebody, or whatever the case is. You will not save all, but for that one person you save, it is well worth it.
Yes. Thank you so much. We've extended our time, and I want to thank all of those. We had at least about 32 persons who would have joined us this evening. We have 26 currently. Oh no, we have about 28 because we have the Cara and family that's sharing. And I really want to thank you. Very informative, lots of information. And one of the things we got to do with this information is to act upon it. In our communities, our communities need us. Our children need us. There are parents that don't have the capacity to deal or the interest in dealing with the concerns of their children. And we need to fill that void and fill that gap. And we start with the ones that are around us. So I really want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. And I know that, an invitation would have been sent out to you. So we have visiting persons, and we want to encourage you to continue to share with us next week. We're going to have a prayer session. We want you to think about your prayer thoughts, things that you need to pray about. You can send them to WhatsApp if you have my WhatsApp number, but come next week with them. We're going to have a prayer session next week. Anything you want to pray about, please join us for prayer. So I know your church year is coming to an end. So we're going to ask to pray for us. We're going to ask Shireen to pray for us this evening. Thank you all our visitors. We have Christine King, we have Ian Harvey, we have Geraldine, Miss Batson, and we have the Harvey's family is Sister Shirley's family. So we really want to thank everybody, and the youth from Lodge Road. We really want to thank you for the supporting of your pastor. So, okay. So, Sister Shireen, can you pray for us this evening? Thank you. Shireen, are you there? Okay. Sister Sandra, are you there? You can pray for us then? I don't know if Reverend wouldn't join us this evening, but Sister Sandra, can you pray for us
please.
then? Okay,
Sure.
great. Thanks.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Heavenly Father, we come to you this evening with a note of praise and thanks. We want to thank you for making it possible, dear God, that we can have another Youth Connect session. We want to thank you for our presenter, and we want to thank you for all of the information that was given to us this evening. And we pray, dear God, that we would not only listen to what was said, but Father, help us to see it as our responsibility to do all that lies in our power, oh God, to help these young people. Father, they are crying out for help, and we pray that you would give us that spiritual vision to see, dear God, where we can tap in so that we can help these young people, not only spiritually, which is ultimate, but Father, help us to be willing, oh God, sometimes to go all out, to open up our hearts, to open up our homes, to open up our everything that we can assist these young people. Father, they are precious in your sight. And Father, they are who you have died for. And Father, help us to open up everything that we have and help us to live the time of life. Heavenly Father, that these young people will see us as proper examples in our communities and in our church and in our wherever we go, that when they see us, dear God, that they will see persons that if they have problems or so, that they will be willing to come and talk to, give us that listening ear. Help us, oh God, to have that heart of love and compassion, and help us, dear God, to keep praying, and not only to pray, but to do all, as I say, that lies in our power to help these young people. We thank you this evening for our presenter, and we pray that you will continue to bless her and her family in a tremendous way, and help her, oh God, that she will continue to be that beacon, oh God, that shines, Father, in everything that she sets about to do. May she prosper, and we pray that you will continue to bless her. Bless everyone who have taken the time out to be on this platform this evening. And Father, we give you thanks for another interesting session. Thank you for Pastor Blackman, who continue to do an excellent job of these sessions. And we give you all the thanks and all the praise. In Jesus' name.